Tonight, we need to talk about a reality that has been systematically sanitized for your comfort. When you think of the solar system, you likely envision a sanctuary, a bright, steady sun in the center, surrounded by a family of planets gliding in graceful, predictable circles. It's a vision of clockwork precision, everything neatly labeled, perfectly spaced, and eternally calm. We lean on the diagrams we saw in school because they suggest order. They suggest that our backyard is a place of peace. But those diagrams were a lie. They were a blindfold. The order we observe today is not the natural state of the cosmos. It is merely the silence of a graveyard. It is the debris left behind after 4 billion years of planetary carnage, orbital wars, and solar fury that once saw our neighborhood looking like a scorched battlefield. We aren't living in a peaceful suburb. We are positioned in the center of a violent, extreme, and deeply hostile shooting gallery, and the ceasefire is only temporary. By the end of our journey tonight, you will never look at a diagram of your home the same way again. Before we begin, if you find yourself fascinated by the dark and beautiful mechanics of the cosmos, take a second to like the video or subscribe. It is a simple action, but it helps this channel reach more curious minds like yours. Now, let's begin. The first horror you must grasp is the scale. Almost every terrifying aspect of the solar system begins with the sheer, suffocating weight of distance. We are taught to see our planets as a closely packed group, but the reality is an almost incomprehensibly vast expanse of absolute nothingness, punctuated by objects that range from quietly lethal to catastrophically violent. This emptiness isn't passive. It's saturated with radiation, cosmic rays, and lethal particles that strip away atmospheres and erode worlds over billions of years. Start with the inner neighborhood, the rocky core of our system. Mercury orbits at roughly 36 million miles from the fire, Venus at 67 million, Earth at 93 million, Mars at 142 million. Even within this compact part of our home, the numbers defy human intuition. The gap between Earth and Mars at their farthest point is over 250 million miles of unshielded, lethal vacuum, a journey no human being has ever attempted. Our fastest robotic scouts still require 9 months just to cross that specific void. But those 9 months aren't a leisurely cruise. They're a passage through an invisible minefield of radiation belts and cosmic hazards that would cook a human alive. But the inner solar system is not where the true scale reveals its weight. That happens when you move outward into the domain of the gas giants. Jupiter sits 484 million miles from the Sun, Saturn at 886 million, Uranus at 1.8 billion, and Neptune, the final sentinel, rests nearly 2.8 billion miles away. To put that in terms you can actually feel, if you were to get into your car tonight and drive toward Neptune at a steady highway speed of 70 miles per hour, without a single stop for fuel or rest, you would be driving for over 4,500 years. By the time you arrived, the civilization that launched you would be ancient history. The very language you speak would be forgotten by the world you left behind. You would arrive at the edge of the planets as a ghost, a relic of a people that no longer exists. And yet Neptune is not the end, it is barely the front porch. Beyond the final planet lies the Kuiper Belt, a dark disk of icy shipwrecks stretching out to 4.6 billion miles. This region contains millions of objects, each one a frozen relic from the early solar system, a fragment of a world that was shattered by gravitational chaos. And further still, the Oort Cloud, a colossal, spherical shell of trillions of frozen objects beginning at 2,000 times the distance from the Earth to the Sun. That outer boundary sits nearly 10 trillion miles away. This vast, freezing, and lightless abyss is the true architecture of your home. The visualization tools we use to understand our neighborhood systematically and unavoidably mislead us. They hide the truth that the solar system is mostly nothing. It is a vacuum approaching absolute zero, filled with darkness, where occasional islands of matter drift like ruins in a lightless sea. At true scale, if the Sun were a circle only 1 inch across, the Earth would be a microscopic dot 9 feet away. Neptune would be a speck nearly 270 feet away, and the Oort Cloud, it would extend for miles in every direction. But those miles aren't empty. They're saturated with cosmic radiation and gravitational traps that have shaped planetary evolution since our system's birth. These distances are not a backdrop to the story, they are the story. These gaps are not empty, they are saturated with radiation, lethal particles streaming from distant supernovae, and gravitational hazards that have erased entire worlds. And at the very heart of this vast, freezing dark sits the source of the terror, because the Sun is not the gentle, golden lamp of our imagination. The Sun is a thermonuclear explosion that has been running continuously for 4.6 billion years, and it is the most volatile tyrant you will ever encounter. To understand the Sun is to understand that we are living in the exhaust pipe of a nuclear furnace. At its core, the pressure is 340 billion times greater than the air you are breathing right now. Every single second, the Sun consumes 600 million tons of hydrogen, releasing energy so immense it takes 100,000 years for a single photon to even fight its way to the surface. When that energy finally breaks free, it shoots out into space as light, but also as a constant, screaming stream of protons and electrons called the solar wind. This isn't a breeze, it is a relentless blast traveling at 550 miles per second, stripping away everything in its path for 11 billion miles. Everything inside that boundary, including you, feels the Sun's breath on them constantly. But the wind is only the beginning. The Sun also produces coronal mass ejections, enormous eruptions of magnetized plasma, billions of tons in weight, launched into the void at 500 miles per second. In 1859, the Carrington event proved what this means. A solar eruption hit the Earth so hard it set telegraph lines on fire and turned the night sky into a neon wasteland. If an event of that scale struck us today, the digital silence would be absolute. Our power grids would fail, not temporarily, but catastrophically. Transformer stations would be permanently destroyed, taking months to replace. Hospitals would exhaust backup power. Water treatment would cease. The economic loss would be in the trillions, and recovery would take years. Your smartphone would become a useless brick of glass in your pocket. We would be reset to 1800 in a single day. And here's what makes this terrifying. NASA calculates roughly a 12% chance of a Carrington-level event in any given decade. That means within your lifetime, there's better than even odds that a solar storm will hit us directly. We'll have less than 15 minutes of warning, 15 minutes to protect the world's power grids, 15 minutes to prevent global collapse. That's not science fiction. That's next year's problem. We are living in a brief window of luck, protected by a thin magnetic bubble and a fragile ocean of air. Without these protections, the Sun would be our executioner. This nuclear tyrant is also changing. It is 30% more luminous today than it was when the Earth formed. In roughly 1 billion years, it will be bright enough to boil our oceans away, turning Earth into a scorched husk. We exist at a particular transient moment in its long, slow evolution. As we move outward from this nuclear heart, we see the scars left on our neighbors, worlds that serve as a grim warning of what the solar system does to planets that lose their defenses. Mercury was stripped bare by solar wind until it became a scorched rock orbiting in hell. Venus was choked by greenhouse gases until it became an inferno where lead melts like ice. Mars was bled dry. Once it had water, oceans, a thick atmosphere, perhaps life. But Mars was small, too small to maintain a magnetic field. Without a magnetic shield, the solar wind ate Mars alive. Over billions of years, the solar wind stripped away 90% of Mars's atmosphere. The oceans evaporated, the world froze, The red color you see today, that's rust. That's a dead world, the corpse of what might have been. And Earth has a magnetic field, for now. But magnetic fields don't last forever. Ours is already weakening. In the next 1,000 years, it will reverse again. During that reversal, there's a window when the shield nearly vanishes. The solar wind will have direct access to our atmosphere. That's when we'll be most vulnerable. That's the moment our luck could run out. Tonight, we are going to look at the mechanics of this destruction. We are going to explore the radioactive hell of Jupiter, the debris of Saturn's ancient murders, and the mysterious monsters lurking in the outer dark. By the end of tonight, the diagram on your wall will no longer look like a map. It will look like a survival guide. Because the neighborhood is far more terrifying than you think. To understand the terror of our neighborhood, you have to look at the source of all of it, the object that defines our existence and our eventual extinction. We call it the sun. We celebrate it in our poetry as a life-giving god, a gentle golden lamp that brings the morning. But the sun does not care about your poetry. The sun is a thermonuclear explosion that has been running continuously for 4.6 billion years, and it is the most volatile neighbor you will ever encounter. To understand the sun is to understand that we are living in the exhaust pipe of a nuclear furnace. Deep within its core, at a depth of nearly 500,000 miles, the environment is a vision of hell that mocks human physics. The temperature reaches 27 million degrees Fahrenheit. The pressure is 340 billion times greater than the atmospheric pressure you feel at sea level. Under these conditions, the very structure of matter collapses. Hydrogen nuclei are crushed together with such violence that they fuse into helium, releasing a torrent of gamma-ray energy so intense that it would instantly vaporize a planet. But here is the first strange horror of our star. The sun is a labyrinth. That energy born in the core wants to escape, but the sun is so dense, so packed with churning plasma that a single photon, a particle of light, cannot simply fly out. It hits an atom, bounces, gets absorbed, and is re-emitted in a random direction. It travels a few millimeters before it happens again, and again, and again. A single photon of light born in the solar core today will spend anywhere from 10,000 to 170,000 years just fighting its way to the surface. Think about that. The sunlight hitting your face right now began its journey when our ancestors were still hunter-gatherers, long before the first city was ever built, long before we even understood what a star was. It has been trapped in the dark heart of that monster for 100,000 years, only to finally break free and cross the void to reach your eyes in a mere 8 minutes. But when that energy reaches the surface, the sun reveals a mystery that has left scientists in a state of quiet, academic desperation for decades. The surface of the sun, the photosphere, burns at a staggering 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit, but as you move asterisk away from the surface, into the sun's outer atmosphere, the corona, the temperature doesn't drop, it explodes. The corona reaches temperatures of 3 million degrees Celsius. This defies all common logic. It is like standing 10 feet away from a campfire and feeling 10 times hotter than if you were touching the flames. Whether it's driven by Ulfen waves, magnetic ripples shivering through the plasma, or millions of tiny nano-flares, constantly detonating like a trillion hydrogen bombs, the result is the same. The sun is surrounded by a halo of invisible, superheated fire that stretches for millions of miles. And it is from this halo that the sun's breath begins to scream. The solar wind is not a breeze. It is a relentless, energetic stream of charged particles, protons and electrons, blasting outward from the corona in every direction at speeds of up to 550 miles per second. This wind is the sun's direct physical influence, and it extends for 11 billion miles. It sweeps past the Earth, past the giants, past the very edge of our system. Everything you have ever known exists inside this screaming stream of solar material. We are constantly being touched by the sun, even in the dead of night. But the wind is only the background noise. The true danger lies in the sun's magnetic temper. The sun is a ball of plasma, but because it's not solid, different parts of it rotate at different speeds. This uneven rotation twists and tangles the sun's massive magnetic field lines like a knot of rubber bands being stretched to the breaking point. Occasionally, those bands snap. When they do, they trigger a coronal mass ejection, a CME. This is a multi-billion-ton cloud of magnetized plasma ripped free from the solar surface and hurled into the void. It travels at millions of miles per hour. If the sun is a nuclear furnace, a CME is its shotgun blast. In 1859, the sun fired that shotgun directly at us. It was called the Carrington event. The blast hit the Earth's magnetic field with such force that telegraph operators reported their equipment sparking and catching fire. Some lines continued to send messages even after being disconnected from their batteries, powered entirely by the electricity the sun had dumped into our atmosphere. The aurora borealis was so bright it was seen in the Caribbean. Miners in the Rocky Mountains woke up and started cooking breakfast at 2:00 a.m., thinking the sun had already risen. We were a primitive civilization then. We used wires and steam. If a Carrington scale event hits us today, and NASA calculates a 12% chance of that happening every decade, the world we know will end in a matter of hours. Our high-voltage transformers, the backbone of every power grid on Earth, are not built to handle that kind of surge. They would melt. And because these transformers are custom-built and weigh hundreds of tons, they cannot be easily replaced. The lights would go out, the internet would vanish, water pumps would stop, supply chains would collapse. We wouldn't just be offline, we would be set back 2 centuries in a single afternoon. The most terrifying part, we wouldn't even see it coming until it was too late. The intense radiation from a solar flare travels at the speed of light. It reaches us in 8 minutes. The massive plasma cloud of a CME follows behind, arriving in 15 to 70 hours. We have satellites watching the sun, but we cannot predict the magnetic orientation of the cloud until it is almost upon us. We would have 15 minutes of warning, 15 minutes to prepare for the collapse of modern society. And as we sit here, relying on our thin magnetic shield to protect us from this tyrant, we have to acknowledge that the shield itself is not a permanent guarantee. The sun's activity follows an 11-year cycle, swinging between a quiet minimum and a violent maximum. We are currently approaching a solar maximum that scientists are watching with increasing unease. The sun's magnetic field is tangling. The flares are becoming more frequent. The shooting gallery is getting louder. But even if we survive the flares, and even if we survive the CMEs, the sun has a final, slow-motion trap waiting for us. The sun is a main sequence star, and as it consumes its hydrogen fuel, its core is getting denser and hotter. This means the sun is getting brighter. It is roughly 30% more luminous today than it was when the Earth formed, and it is continuing to brighten by about 1% every 100 million years. In roughly 1 billion years, the sun will be bright enough to fundamentally break the Earth. The extra heat will cause our oceans to evaporate. The water vapor will rise into the upper atmosphere, where the sun's ultraviolet radiation will tear the molecules apart, allowing the hydrogen to escape into space. The oceans will not just dry up, they will be physically removed from the planet. The Earth will become a scorched, sterile rock, a twin of the horror we already see in our inner neighborhood. This is the ultimate lesson of our star. The sun is not our friend, it is our landlord, and it is slowly raising the rent until we can no longer afford to live here. To understand what happens when that rent is finally collected, we have to look away from the fire. We have to look at the first victims of this tyrant, the planets that once might have had a chance, but were systematically erased by the sun's fury. Mercury, the baked rock, and Venus, the beautiful inferno. Because if you want to see the future of the Earth, you only need to look at what the sun has already done to our neighbors. Mercury was stripped bare, but what happened to Venus? What happened to Venus is a warning that should keep every human being awake at night. Let's move closer to the fire. To understand the true hostility of our neighborhood, you have to look at the first victims of the sun's tyranny. These are the inner worlds, planets that once sat in the same cosmic nursery as Earth, but were forged into nightmares. If Earth is a masterpiece of biological balance, our closest neighbors are monuments to what happens when that balance is violently shattered. In the story of our solar system, they are the warning signs we ignored for centuries. Let's start with the one that took the full, unshielded weight of the blow: Mercury. Mercury is a world that has been effectively skinned alive. It orbits so close to the solar furnace, just 36 million miles away, that it exists in a state of permanent geological trauma. For billions of years, the sun has been screaming at this planet, and Mercury has had no way to scream back. Most people assume Mercury is just a hotter version of Earth. They imagine a desert, but a desert implies an atmosphere, a breeze, and a sky. Mercury has none of those. Because it is so small and sits so deep within the sun's gravitational throat, the solar wind has systematically stripped away its atmosphere. It is a world without a shield. Without air to distribute heat, Mercury has become a place of physical impossibilities. On the side facing the sun, the temperature screams up to 800 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to melt lead and turn zinc into liquid. But the moment you cross the terminator, the line between day and night, the reality shifts into a freezing abyss. Because there is no atmosphere to hold the heat, the temperature plummets to minus 270 degrees Fahrenheit. Within a single mile of Mercury's surface, you can experience a temperature swing of over 1,000 degrees. There is no other place in the solar system where the laws of thermodynamics feel quite this schizophrenic. But the horror of Mercury isn't just the heat, it's the silence. Mercury is geologically dead. It is a cold gray cinder that functions as a cosmic museum of violence. Every crater on its face, like the massive Caloris Basin, an impact site so large it sent shockwaves through the entire planet, creating mountains on the opposite side, is a permanent record of an impact that was never erased. On Earth, wind and water wash away the scars of the past. On Mercury, the scars are the only thing left. It is a world that was beaten into submission by the sun and then abandoned in the dark. It serves as a grim reminder. In this solar system, if you lose your atmosphere, you lose your soul. You become a rock, waiting for the next impact in a lightless vacuum. But Mercury is honest. Its dangers are visible, etched into its cratered skin. If you want to see a world that is truly deceptive, a world that hides its terror under a veil of blinding beauty, you have to look at Venus. For centuries, astronomers called Venus Earth's twin. It is nearly the same size, the same mass, and made of the same chemical ingredients. Through a telescope, it looks like a soft, glowing pearl of white light, the brightest object in our sky after the moon. But that glow is the greatest deception in the history of science. Venus is not our twin, it is our evil twin. It is a vision of what happens when a planet's climate system turns into a suicide pact. The white clouds we see from Earth are not made of water vapor. They are thick, swirling masses of concentrated sulfuric acid. It rains acid on Venus, but the surface is so hot that the rain evaporates before it can even touch the ground, a process called virga, creating a perpetual cycle of chemical torment. If you were to stand on the surface of Venus, you wouldn't just die. You would be processed by the physics of extremity. The first thing that would kill you is the pressure. The atmosphere of Venus is 96% carbon dioxide, and it is so thick that the pressure at the surface is 92 times greater than Earth's. Standing on Venus is equivalent to being 3,000 feet underwater on Earth. Before the heat could even sear your skin, the air itself would crush your skeletal structure as easily as a heavy boot crushes a soda can. You wouldn't just be flattened, you would be turned into a biological pulp in a fraction of a second. But even if you possessed a suit that could withstand the crushing weight of a mile of ocean, you couldn't survive the oven. Venus is the hottest planet in the solar system, even hotter than Mercury. The runaway greenhouse effect has turned the planet into a planetary trap. The thick CO2 blanket allows solar energy in but refuses to let it out. The surface temperature sits at a constant, unyielding 860 degrees Fahrenheit. Day or night at the poles or the equator, the heat never leaves. It is a world where lead melts like ice, and the rocks themselves glow a dull, dark red in the suffocating gloom. Humanity has tried to touch this world. We couldn't help ourselves. In the 1970s and 80s, the Soviet Union launched the Venera program. They knew Venus was hostile, but they didn't realize they were trying to land a machine in a furnace. They built their probes like submarines, with thick titanium hulls and internal cooling systems. One of them, Venera 13, managed to survive the descent. It landed in 1982, and for a few brief moments, it gave us the only view we have ever had of this hellscape. It sent back images of jagged, yellow-orange rocks under a sky the color of a bruise. It measured the wind, it sampled the soil, and it waited for the inevitable. The machine survived for exactly 127 minutes. That is the lifespan of human technology on our twin world. 2 hours. After that, the heat soaked through the titanium, the electronics began to fail, and the crushing pressure finally won. Venera 13 didn't just break, it was consumed by the environment. Today, its remains sit on the Venusian surface, a melted, crushed lump of metal, a monument to the fact that some parts of our neighborhood are simply not meant to be visited. Venus also challenges our very understanding of time. It rotates so slowly that a single day on Venus lasts 243 Earth days. However, it only takes 225 Earth days to orbit the Sun. Think about that logic. On Venus, a day is longer than a year. And because the planet rotates retrograde, backwards, the Sun rises in the west and sets in the east, but it stays in the sky for months at a time. It is a world where time has practically stalled, locked in a perpetual, suffocating noon that refuses to end. As we look at Mercury and Venus, we see two different paths to extinction. Mercury shows us the cold death, the stripping of a world until it is nothing but a naked rock. Venus shows us the hot death, the choking of a world until its own atmosphere becomes a weapon of mass destruction. Earth sits precisely between these two nightmares. We are the survivor of the inner solar system. We have the atmosphere that Mercury lost, and we have the liquid water that Venus boiled away. But why? What allowed Earth to escape the furnace? Scientists now believe that the difference wasn't just luck. It was the result of specific, violent conditions that our neighbors lacked. Venus and Earth started as identical twins. They had the same amount of water, the same volcanoes, the same potential. But because Venus was just a little too close to the Sun, its oceans began to evaporate. The water vapor, a potent greenhouse gas, trapped more heat, which evaporated more water in a lethal feedback loop that couldn't be stopped. Venus didn't choose to be a hellscape, it was pushed. And Mercury was simply too small to fight back. It lacked the internal heat to generate a magnetic field strong enough to hold onto its air. These two worlds serve as the ultimate existential warning. They prove that the conditions for life, mild temperatures, breathable air, liquid oceans, are not a permanent feature of the universe. They are a rare, fragile exception. Earth is a sanctuary, but it is surrounded by a cemetery of worlds that failed. But as we look at our own world, we have to realize that our safety is not guaranteed by our distance alone. To understand why we are alive while Venus is a furnace and Mercury is a cinder, we have to look at the scars on our own world. We have to look at the catastrophic, world-ending accident that gave us our shield. Because Earth's story didn't start with peace. It started with a murder. A collision so violent it nearly destroyed the planet before it ever had a chance to begin. Let's look at the day the Earth died and the Moon was born. To understand why we are standing on a living, breathing sanctuary, while our neighbors are nothing but scorched cinders and acid-choked furnaces, we have to talk about the most violent day in the history of the world. We have to look at the scars on our own world. Scars that have been hidden by the movement of continents and the growth of forests, but remain etched into our planet's DNA. Earth's survival in this terrifying shooting gallery was not a result of a peaceful evolution. It was the result of an ancient, world-ending murder. Roughly 4.5 billion years ago, the inner solar system was a place of orbital insanity. There was no order. There were dozens of protoplanets, infant worlds trying to find their place around a young, aggressive sun. Among them was the proto-Earth, a molten rock beginning to cool. And then there was Theia. Theia was a planet roughly the size of Mars, and it was on a direct collision course with us. This wasn't a slow approach or a gentle nudge. This was a high-velocity planetary assassination. When Theia struck the Earth, it wasn't just an impact. It was an apocalypse. The energy released in that single moment is almost impossible for a human brain to process. It was billions of times more powerful than every nuclear weapon ever built, detonating at once. The crust of the Earth was instantly vaporized. The planet didn't just crack, it liquidized. Two worlds trying to occupy the same space at the same time resulted in a spray of molten rock and superheated gas that shot thousands of miles into the void. For a brief period, the Earth as we know it ceased to exist. It was a glowing, distorted mass of fire, spinning wildly in the dark. But out of this carnage came our salvation. Most of Theia's heavy iron core sank deep into the Earth, merging with our own. This gave our planet an unnaturally large, dense, and energetic core, the very engine that generates our magnetic field today. Without that violent theft of Theia's heart, Earth might have ended up like Mars, a world with a weak magnetic shield that was eventually bled dry by the sun. The debris that didn't fall back into the Earth began to orbit us, eventually coalescing into the Moon. We see the Moon today as a romantic, silver light in the sky, but we need to look closer. The Moon is not a separate world. It is the debris of our own planet's near destruction. It is a stabilizing ghost that follows us through the dark. The presence of the Moon is the only reason our seasons are predictable. It acts as a gravitational anchor, preventing the Earth from wobbling chaotically on its axis. Without the Moon, the Earth's tilt would swing wildly, causing the North Pole to occasionally face the Sun directly, boiling the ice caps and freezing the tropics in a matter of months. Life as we know it could never have evolved in such a schizophrenic climate. We owe our stability to the very impact that nearly erased us. But the birth of the Moon was only the beginning of the siege. Once the Earth settled back into a sphere, the solar system decided to test our endurance once again. This period is known as the Late Heavy Bombardment, and it is the most terrifying chapter in the biography of our inner neighborhood. For hundreds of millions of years, starting about 4 billion years ago, the inner solar system was turned into a literal shooting gallery. It wasn't just a few stray rocks. It was a sustained, systematic barrage of trillions of tons of asteroid and comet material. The evidence is written all over the face of the moon. Every dark patch you see when you look up at night, the lunar Maria, is a colossal impact basin where asteroids punched through the crust and allowed lava to flood the surface. Earth was hit even harder. Because Earth is larger and has stronger gravity, it was a much bigger target. We were struck by thousands of objects the size of cities and hundreds the size of small countries. During this era, the Earth's surface was a vision of hell. The atmosphere was a thick brown haze of vaporized rock and soot. The energy from the largest impacts was so great that it didn't just warm the oceans, it boiled them. Imagine an entire ocean, miles deep, being turned into steam in a matter of days. The Earth's water cycle was literally broken. This happened not once, but potentially dozens of times. Any life that had begun to take hold in the shallow waters would have been sterilized instantly. Only the organisms hidden deep within the Earth's crust or near volcanic vents at the bottom of the deepest trenches could have survived this cosmic firestorm. We often wonder why the solar system seems so peaceful today. We see the planets in their clean schoolroom orbits and assume that is the natural state of things. It isn't. The reason we are living in a period of relative calm is simply that the solar system ran out of ammunition. Most of the massive rocks that once threatened to shatter the Earth were either used up during the late heavy bombardment, swallowed by the sun, or kicked out into the freezing dark by Jupiter's gravity. We are living in a brief window of safety, standing on a planet that has been beaten, melted, and boiled over billions of years. But we must not mistake this temporary ceasefire for permanent security, because the shooting gallery hasn't closed, it's just slowed down. The rocks are still out there. Between Mars and Jupiter sits the asteroid belt, a graveyard of failed planets containing millions of rocky fragments, and they are not sitting still. Jupiter, the heavyweight tyrant of our system, uses its massive gravity to constantly nudge these rocks. There are regions in the belt called Kirkwood gaps, where gravitational resonances act like invisible slingshots. If an asteroid drifts into one of these gaps, Jupiter's pull can rip it out of its stable orbit and fling it toward the Sun, and toward us. You have already seen what happens when the solar system decides to renew its attack. 66 million years ago, a rock no larger than a small city struck the Yucatan Peninsula. It released energy equivalent to 1 billion Hiroshima bombs. It didn't just kill the dinosaurs, it set the atmosphere on fire. It turned the sky into an oven, cooked every animal that wasn't underground or underwater, and then plunged the world into a decade of freezing darkness as soot blocked out the sun. That impactor was roughly 6 miles across. The solar system still contains millions of objects that size or larger. Many of them are near-Earth objects, currently crossing our orbit in a silent, invisible dance. We have only catalogued a fraction of them. In 1908, a relatively tiny object, less than 200 feet across, exploded over Tunguska, Siberia. It didn't even hit the ground. It disintegrated in midair with the force of 15 megatons of TNT, flattening 800 square miles of forest and knocking down 80 million trees. If that object had arrived just 4 hours later, it would have detonated over London or Paris, erasing a major world capital from the map in a single second. No warning. No chance for escape. And in 2013, the world watched in shock as a 60-foot rock exploded over Chelyabinsk, Russia, with the force of 30 atomic bombs. It arrived from the direction of the sun, the one blind spot where our telescopes cannot see. It was a reminder from the universe, I am still here, I am still watching. This is the terrifying reality of our home. We are riding a molten rock with a stolen core, shielded by a ghost moon, orbiting a nuclear furnace, all while moving through an invisible minefield of ancient debris. We call it our neighborhood, but it is a place of absolute extremity. Every breath you take is a miracle of physics. You are alive because Earth's magnetic shield held back a solar flare. You are alive because an asteroid missed our orbit by a few thousand miles. You are alive because the late heavy bombardment ended before it could completely strip our planet of its atmosphere. But as we look deeper into our neighborhood, we realize that the threats aren't just coming from falling rocks. The very things that keep us alive are the same things that could fail us. We rely on our magnetic field, but as we are about to see, that shield is not a fixed constant. It is a flickering, changing bubble that has failed before and will fail again. And beyond our shield, the solar system becomes even more unrecognizable, because as we leave the inner planets and cross the asteroid belt, we enter the domain of the giants, worlds so massive they challenge our understanding of what a planet is. We are about to enter the territory of the failed sun, a monster that rules our neighborhood with an iron gravity and possesses a radioactive heart that would kill any human being in minutes. It is time to meet Jupiter, and to understand that in this solar system, the biggest bully isn't the sun, it's the planet that almost became one. We are alive because of a ghost. As you sit here, breathing the air of this world, you are being bombarded by a silent, invisible killer. From the nuclear heart of the sun, and from the violent deaths of distant stars across the galaxy, a constant rain of high-energy radiation is screaming toward us. It travels at millions of miles per hour, capable of shredding your DNA, stripping the moisture from your cells, and turning our lush, green planet into a sterile, irradiated rock like Mars or Mercury. But it doesn't. It stops just short of our atmosphere, hitting an invisible wall that curves and flows around the Earth like water around a stone in a rushing river. This is the magnetosphere, Earth's magnetic shield. It is the only thing standing between you and the full, unmitigated fury of the solar system. We call it a shield, but in reality, it is a cage. An invisible, magnetic cage generated by the violent movement of liquid metal thousands of miles beneath your feet. To understand why this is terrifying, you have to look at what's happening in the basement of our world. Deep inside the Earth sits a solid iron core, hot as the surface of the sun. Surrounding it is a vast, churning ocean of liquid iron and nickel, the outer core. Because of the heat left over from our planet's formation and the radioactive decay of elements, this liquid metal is in constant, violent motion. It rises, cools, and sinks in massive convection currents, all while the Earth spins. This creates what physicists call a dynamo. It turns our entire planet into a giant bar magnet, projecting an invisible force field that extends tens of thousands of miles into space. We take this shield for granted. We treat it as a permanent feature of our existence, but the history of the Earth tells a much darker story. Our shield is not a solid wall. It is a flickering, changing, and deeply unstable bubble, and it has failed us before. Over the course of geological time, the Earth's magnetic poles are not fixed. They wander. And every few 100,000 years, they do something unthinkable. They flip. The North Pole becomes the South, and the South becomes the North. This isn't a theory. It is a proven fact recorded in the magnetic signatures of ancient volcanic rocks on the ocean floor. The last time this happened was roughly 780,000 years ago. We are, quite literally, overdue for another reversal. The terrifying part isn't the flip itself, it's the transition. When the poles begin to swap, the magnetic field doesn't just rotate smoothly, it weakens, it becomes disorganized. It can drop to as little as 10% of its normal strength. During this period, which can last for centuries, the invisible wall that protects us from the solar system develops holes. The shooting gallery of the sun gets a direct line to our atmosphere. During a magnetic reversal, we would be exposed to a massive increase in cosmic radiation. This wouldn't just mean a few more cancer cases or a beautiful light show in the sky. It would mean the systematic destruction of our modern world. Our satellites, which sit outside the protection of the lower atmosphere, would be the first to die. The radiation would fry their circuits, turning our global communication, GPS, and weather tracking systems into billion-dollar pieces of space junk. But the threat would reach the surface, too. The high-energy particles from the sun would interact with our atmosphere, potentially depleting the ozone layer and allowing even more ultraviolet radiation to reach the ground. Our power grids, built on thousands of miles of conductive wires, would act like giant antennas, catching the solar energy and surging until the transformers explode. We have seen hints of this weakness recently. Over the last 2 centuries, the Earth's magnetic field has weakened by about 9%. Scientists have identified a specific region in the southern hemisphere, stretching from Africa to South America, where the field is unusually thin. They call it the South Atlantic Anomaly. In this region, the radiation from space reaches much deeper into our atmosphere. Satellites that pass through this hole often experience glitches, their computers rebooting spontaneously as high-energy protons strike their microchips. It is a microscopic preview of what a full-scale magnetic collapse would look like. We are riding a world whose primary defense is a churning ocean of liquid fire that we cannot control and cannot fully predict. If that dynamo ever stops, if the core cools just enough, we lose our shield forever. We know exactly what that looks like because we can see it through our telescopes. We only have to look at our neighbor, the red planet. Mars was once a twin of Earth. It had a thick atmosphere. It had vast liquid oceans. It may have even had its own story of life, but Mars is smaller than Earth. It cooled faster. Its internal dynamo died billions of years ago, and its magnetic shield vanished. Once the shield was gone, the sun became an executioner. The solar wind, patient and relentless, began to eat the Martian atmosphere. Molecule by molecule, the sun's breath stripped the air away, carrying it off into the void of space. Without the weight of an atmosphere, the oceans evaporated. The water was torn apart by solar radiation, the hydrogen escaping into space, the oxygen reacting with the surface iron. Mars didn't just dry up. It was bled to death by the solar system. The red dust you see today isn't just dirt. It is the oxidized remains of a world that lost its shield. It is a planetary corpse, a warning to us that our blue sanctuary is only one internal cooling event away from becoming a desert. But as we stand on this fragile rock, staring up through our thinning magnetic cage, we realize that the solar system isn't just a collection of planets. It is a graveyard of things that shouldn't be there. Because as we move past Mars and cross the threshold of the inner system, we encounter the debris of a war we are only just beginning to understand. We are about to enter the domain of the monsters, worlds so massive they don't just orbit the sun, they challenge it. We are going to cross the asteroid belt and enter the territory of the failed sun. A planet so heavy, it holds the entire solar system in its gravitational grip, and so radioactive it would turn a human being into a ghost in a matter of seconds. It is time to talk about Jupiter, and why the biggest threat to our existence might not be the sun, but the giant that is supposedly protecting us. The tragedy of our neighborhood is that we are surrounded by the corpses of worlds that could have been like ours. We look at Mars today and see a barren red desert, a silent, frozen wasteland of dust and shadow. It is the most studied extraterrestrial world in human history, and yet the more we learn about it, the more uncomfortable the truth becomes. Mars is not just a planet, it is a crime scene. It is the story of a world that had everything it needed to succeed, only to be systematically bled to death by the very system it calls home. To understand the horror of Mars, you have to look past the red dust and see the ghost of what it used to be. 4 billion years ago, Mars was not red. It was blue. It possessed a thick, protective atmosphere. It had vast, liquid oceans that covered nearly a third of its surface. It had a water cycle, with clouds and rain feeding river networks that carved deep canyons into its crust. In every way that matters, ancient Mars was a twin of the infant Earth. It was a world of immense potential, a place where life could have, and perhaps did, take its first fragile breaths. But Mars had a fatal flaw: it was small. Because Mars is only about half the size of the Earth, its internal heat was a finite resource that it spent too quickly. Deep within the Martian interior, the same kind of liquid iron dynamo that protects the Earth today began to slow down. As the core cooled and solidified, the planet's magnetic shield started to flicker and fail. And in the solar system, losing your shield is a death sentence. Once the magnetic cage vanished, the sun became an executioner. The solar wind, that relentless high-energy stream of protons and electrons, no longer had an invisible wall to bounce off of. It began to strike the Martian atmosphere directly. Molecule by molecule, the sun's breath stripped the air away, carrying it off into the lightless void of space. It wasn't a sudden explosion or a dramatic catastrophe. It was a slow, agonizing erosion that lasted for billions of years. As the atmosphere thinned, the atmospheric pressure dropped. Without the weight of the air to hold them down, the Martian oceans began to boil into the vacuum. The water vapor rose into the upper atmosphere, where the sun's ultraviolet radiation tore the molecules apart. The hydrogen escaped into space, and the oxygen remained behind, reacting with the iron-rich soil of the surface. The red color of Mars is not the color of life. It is the color of rust. The entire planet is a rusted-out hull of a world that was once vibrant. It is a planetary corpse, showing us exactly what the solar system does to a world that loses its defenses. Today, the atmosphere of Mars is a thin, pathetic remnant, less than 1% of the density of Earth's air. It is 95% carbon dioxide, a toxic, suffocating veil that provides no protection from the freezing cold of space. The average temperature on the surface is -80 degrees Fahrenheit. Liquid water cannot exist on the surface. It would either freeze instantly into ice or boil away into gas. Mars has been rendered sterile, its geological heart stopped, its volcanoes silent, its oceans turned to dust. But the solar system is not finished with the humiliation of this world. Even in its death, Mars is being prepared for one final, violent act. If you look at the Martian sky, you will see two small, misshapen moons, Phobos and Deimos. They are not like our moon, graceful, silver, and stabilizing. They are captured asteroids, dark and jagged, orbiting like vultures around a dying world, and one of them is on a suicide mission. Phobos, the larger of the two, is the closest moon to its parent planet in the entire solar system. It orbits just 3,700 miles above the Martian surface, so close that it completes an entire trip around the planet 3 times every single Martian day. But Phobos is trapped in a gravitational death spiral. Every second, the gravity of Mars is dragging Phobos closer. It is descending at a rate of about 6 feet every century. It sounds slow, but in the deep time of the cosmos, it is an impending collision. In roughly 50 million years, Phobos will reach its limit. But it won't hit the ground as a solid rock. Long before it strikes the surface, the tidal forces of Mars will become too intense for the moon's structural integrity to handle. The gravity will pull on the front of the moon harder than the back, literally shredding Phobos into pieces while it is still in the sky. Mars, a planet that today has no rings, will eventually be surrounded by a dark, jagged ring of debris, the pulverized remains of its own moon. And then, piece by piece, that ring will rain down onto the Martian surface in a sustained, multi-million-year bombardment that will gouge new scars into an already broken world. The tragedy of Mars serves as a grim reflection for us. It reminds us that our blue sanctuary is not the default state of a planet. It is an anomaly. We are separated from the red desert of Mars by nothing more than the churning of liquid metal in our core and the distance of a few million miles. We are living on a world that is still warm, while our neighbor has already gone cold. But the inner solar system, for all its heat and its tragedies, is a relatively small and quiet place. The 4 rocky planets and the Sun occupy only a tiny fraction of the space we call home. To truly understand the terror of our neighborhood, you have to look past the red death of Mars. You have to cross the asteroid belt, that graveyard of failed worlds, and enter a region of the system where the very scale of reality changes. We are about to enter the domain of the Titans, worlds so massive they don't just orbit the Sun, they challenge its authority, worlds where the pressures can turn gas into metal and clouds into diamonds. At the threshold of this outer kingdom stands the greatest bully in our system. A monster of swirling storms and lethal radiation that holds the fate of every other planet in its gravitational grip. It is a planet that looks like a masterpiece through a telescope, but hides a radioactive heart that would turn a human being into ash in a matter of seconds. It is time to meet the failed Sun, the ruler of the outer dark, the giant that both protects us and threatens to consume us. It is time to talk about Jupiter, and to realize that in this solar system, the biggest threat to your life might not be the fire of the Sun, but the cold, crushing weight of the king of the planets. To understand the true terror of our neighborhood, you have to look past the small, rocky islands of the inner system and face the giant that rules the outer dark. Beyond the asteroid belt sits a world so massive, so energetic, and so profoundly hostile that it defies the very definition of a planet. This is Jupiter, the king of the planets, but a more honest name would be the failed Sun. Jupiter is not just a larger version of Earth or Mars. It is a completely different kind of monster, operating by laws of physics that would be unrecognizable to anyone standing on a solid surface. Jupiter is roughly 88,800 miles in diameter, 11 times wider than the Earth. You could take every other planet, every moon, every asteroid, and every comet in the solar system, pile them all together, and Jupiter would still be more than twice as massive as all of them combined. It is the gravitational anchor of our neighborhood, a world that holds the fate of the entire system in its swirling, toxic clouds. But Jupiter's size is only the beginning of its horror. To understand Jupiter is to realize that we are living next to a ticking time bomb of radiation and pressure. Jupiter has no solid surface. There is no ground to stand on, no floor to catch your fall. If you were to drop into Jupiter's atmosphere, your journey would be a long, terrifying descent into a crushing abyss. As you fall through the outer layers of ammonia and ammonium hydrosulfide clouds, the pressure increases exponentially. Within minutes, the gas around you would become as thick as water, and then as dense as stone. Deep within the Jovian interior, the pressure becomes so extreme, millions of times greater than the air at sea level, that the very atoms of hydrogen are crushed until their electrons are torn away. The hydrogen ceases to be a gas and turns into a shimmering, churning ocean of liquid metallic hydrogen. This substance, which exists only under conditions of absolute extremity, conducts electricity like a wire. And it is this churning metallic ocean, spinning at a furious rate, that generates Jupiter's magnetic field. If Earth's magnetic field is a shield, Jupiter's is a weapon. Jupiter's magnetosphere is the largest structure in the solar system. If it were visible to the naked eye from Earth, it would appear in our night sky 5 times larger than the full moon, despite being nearly 500 million miles away, but you wouldn't want to see it. This magnetic field is a giant particle accelerator, trapping electrons and ions from the Sun and from its own moons, and whipping them to near-light speeds. This creates a radiation belt so intense that it is essentially a wall of lethal energy. For a human being, entering Jupiter's inner radiation belts would be equivalent to receiving 1,000,000 times the lethal dose of radiation in a matter of seconds. Your cells would be dismantled at the molecular level, your electronics would be fried, your very existence would be erased before you even touched the clouds. Even our most hardened robotic spacecraft, like the Juno mission, have to be built inside a titanium vault just to survive a few orbits. But Jupiter is not just a source of radiation, it is a source of chaos. Because of its immense gravity, Jupiter acts as the solar system's grand sculptor. It reaches into the asteroid belt with invisible fingers, creating Kirkwood gaps, empty lanes where asteroids are violently kicked out of their orbits. While some argue that Jupiter acts as a shield, deflecting comets away from the Earth, the truth is far more complicated. Jupiter is just as likely to snatch a comet from the outer system and fling it directly at us. It is a cosmic bully that plays a dangerous game of billiards with the rocks of our neighborhood, and we are the potential targets. We saw what happens when Jupiter's gravity decides to feed. In July 1994, the world watched in awe as the fragments of comet Shoemaker-Levy 9 struck Jupiter's southern hemisphere. These weren't just small impacts. Each fragment, some a mile wide, exploded with the force of millions of megatons of TNT. Each impact left a dark scar in the Jovian clouds that was larger than the entire planet Earth. If those fragments had hit us, human history would have ended in a single week. Jupiter took the blow, but it was a reminder that we live in a system where planetary destruction is not a theory, it is a witnessed event. And Jupiter's violence extends to its own family. Orbiting this monster are dozens of moons, but the four largest, the Galilean moons, are worlds of their own, each trapped in a unique version of hell created by their parent planet. Io, the innermost, is the most volcanically active world in the universe. It is caught in a gravitational tug-of-war between Jupiter and the other moons, a process called tidal flexing. This constant squeezing and stretching generates so much internal friction that the moon's interior is permanently molten. Io literally turns itself inside out, with hundreds of volcanoes erupting constantly, shooting plumes of sulfur 300 miles into the void. It is a world of fire and brimstone, perpetually being resurfaced by its own agony. Then there is Europa. On the surface, it is a silent, frozen wasteland of water ice. But beneath that shell lies a dark, abyssal ocean that contains more liquid water than all of Earth's oceans combined. Europa is perhaps the most scientifically enticing world in our system, a place where life could theoretically exist. But to reach that life, you would have to survive the most intense radiation environment in the solar system, and then drill through miles of ice into a lightless sea that has been sealed away for billions of years. Jupiter is a masterpiece of extremity. It is a planet that almost became a star, a world that rules its domain with crushing pressure and lethal energy. It is a reminder that the neighborhood of the outer solar system operates on a scale that makes human life seem like a microscopic rounding error. But as we leave the failed sun and move further into the dark, the terror doesn't vanish. It simply becomes more graceful. We are about to enter the domain of the jewel of our system, a planet that looks like a dream through a telescope, but hides the evidence of a prehistoric murder that is still being processed by the laws of gravity. It is time to meet Saturn, and to understand that its beautiful rings are not a decoration, they are a crime scene. The further we travel into the outer solar system, the more the nature of terror changes. In the inner system, the dangers are obvious: scorching heat, airless voids, and falling rocks. Around the gas giants, the terror is massive and loud, written in the language of crushing pressures and lethal radiation. But as we look at the small, icy satellites orbiting these monsters, we encounter a different kind of dread. This is the horror of the silent abyss. This is the realization that our neighborhood contains vast, lightless oceans that make the deepest trenches of Earth look like a sunlit pond. We have spent our history looking at Mars for signs of life, assuming that biology requires a sun-drenched surface. but the solar system has hidden its most profound secrets under miles of solid ice. Consider Europa, the second of Jupiter's large moons. On the surface, it is a masterpiece of geometric desolation. It is a world encased in a shell of water ice so cold and so hard that it functions like granite. The surface is crisscrossed by dark, reddish veins, long fractures and ridges that stretch for thousands of miles. There are no mountains on Europa. There are almost no craters. Instead, the world is a chaotic jigsaw puzzle of ice blocks that have been broken, shifted, and refrozen. But it is what lies beneath the ice that should haunt you. Because Europa is trapped in a gravitational tug-of-war with Jupiter, the moon's interior is constantly being squeezed and stretched. This tidal flexing generates immense internal heat. It melts the bottom of the ice shell, creating a subsurface ocean that encompasses the entire world. This isn't just a layer of water, it is an abyssal sea estimated to be up to 100 miles deep. To put that in perspective, the deepest point in Earth's oceans, the Challenger Deep, is only about 7 miles down. Europa contains more liquid water than all the oceans of Earth combined, and it has existed in total, suffocating darkness for 4 billion years. Imagine standing on the surface of Europa. The silence would be absolute, punctuated only by the occasional thunderous groan of the ice shell cracking under the weight of Jupiter's gravity. Beneath your feet lies 10 miles of solid ice, and beneath that, a lightless world where the concept of day has never existed. If life has evolved in that abyss, it is a life that has never seen a star. It is a biology fueled not by sunlight, but by the chemical energy of hydrothermal vents on the sea floor, dark volcanic chimneys spewing minerals into the freezing black. The terror of Europa is the terror of the unknown. We are drawn to it because it is the most likely place in our system to find extraterrestrial life, but we rarely stop to consider what that life would look like. In a world of total darkness and crushing pressure, evolution would not produce anything recognizable to us. We would be looking at monsters of the deep, biological anomalies that have spent eons in a high-pressure cage. And Europa is not alone. Orbiting Saturn is a tiny, brilliant white moon called Enceladus. It is only 300 miles across, small enough to fit inside the borders of a single state, but it is one of the most geologically aggressive objects in the system. At the south pole of Enceladus, the ice is scarred by 4 massive fractures known as the Tiger Stripes. From these cracks, the moon is actively screaming into space. Colossal geysers shoot plumes of water vapor and ice particles hundreds of miles into the void. Enceladus is literally bleeding its internal ocean into the solar system. When the Cassini spacecraft flew through these plumes, it detected organic molecules and molecular hydrogen. The evidence is almost undeniable. Enceladus has a warm, salty ocean with hydrothermal activity at its base. It possesses all the ingredients for life. But the solar system does not give up its secrets without a price. To visit these abyssal oceans, you must first navigate a graveyard of radiation. Jupiter's magnetic field is so powerful that it creates a donut-shaped ring of lethal energy, the plasma torus, that encompasses the orbit of its moons. Europa sits right in the heart of this radiation belt. A human being standing on the surface of Europa would receive a lethal dose of radiation in less than 10 minutes. The very ice you would need to drill through is being constantly pelted by high-energy particles that would dismantle your DNA at the molecular level. The moons of the outer giants are beautiful from a distance, but up close, they are radioactive tombs guarding dark secrets. Even the largest moon in the solar system, Ganymede, hides a secret ocean. Ganymede is larger than the planet Mercury, and it's the only moon in existence with its own magnetic field. But even this shield is not enough to protect it from the crushing influence of Jupiter. Ganymede's surface is a record of ancient tectonic upheavals, where the ice has been ripped apart and reorganized over billions of years. Beneath its cratered crust, models suggest there are layers of ice and water stacked like a cosmic club sandwich, with a deep ocean sitting hundreds of miles down. And then there is Callisto, the world that time forgot. Callisto is the most heavily cratered object in the solar system. It has no geological heart, no volcanoes, no tectonic plates. It is a dead, frozen ball of rock and ice that has sat in the same state for 4 billion years. Every part of its surface is saturated with impacts. It is a planetary archive of every rock that has ever flown through the outer system. Callisto is a reminder of what the solar system does to a world that has no way to renew itself. It is a world that has been hit so many times that there is no room left for new scars. The moons of terror represent a fundamental shift in our understanding of our neighborhood. They tell us that the habitable zone is a myth. You don't need to be 93 million miles from the sun to have an ocean. You just need enough gravity to squeeze a moon until it melts. But this realization carries an existential weight. If the solar system is full of these dark, hidden oceans, then the universe might be far more crowded than we thought. And if life is common in these abyssal depths, it forces us to ask why we haven't heard from anyone. Perhaps the ice is not just a shield, perhaps it is a prison. Maybe the reason the galaxy is silent is that most life in the universe is trapped under 20 miles of ice, looking up at a frozen ceiling, unaware that the stars even exist. They are born in the dark, they live in the dark, and they die in the dark, never knowing they're part of a solar system at all. But as we leave the abyssal oceans of Jupiter and Saturn, we encounter a different kind of violence, because not everything in the outer system is hidden under ice. Some of the most spectacular features of our neighborhood are the result of outright destruction. We are about to move to the most beautiful sight in the solar system, a world of golden clouds and shimmering rings, but we must look past the beauty, because the rings of Saturn are not a decoration. They are a record of a catastrophic murder. They are the pulverized remains of a world that got too close. And as we will see, the solar system is still in the process of consuming the evidence. It is time to look at the debris of murder. It is time to look at Saturn. To understand the true nature of our neighborhood, you must learn to look past the beauty. For as long as humans have possessed telescopes, we have marveled at the jewel of our system. Saturn is a masterpiece of cosmic architecture, a world of golden clouds, hexagonal storms, and the most magnificent ring system in the known universe. We treat it as a symbol of grace, a decoration of the night sky that suggests a certain celestial elegance. But the elegance of Saturn is a mask. When you look at those shimmering rings, you aren't looking at a peaceful halo. You are looking at the pulverized remains of a prehistoric murder. You are looking at a crime scene that is still being processed by the cold, indifferent laws of gravity. Saturn is the second largest planet in our system, a gas giant roughly 9 times wider than the Earth. Like Jupiter, it is a world of crushing pressures and swirling hydrogen, but it is Saturn's crown that holds the most terrifying secret of the outer dark. For centuries, we believed the rings of Saturn were a permanent feature of our solar system. We assumed they had been there since the beginning, a byproduct of the planet's formation 4.5 billion years ago. But the data from the Cassini mission, which spent 13 years orbiting this giant, shattered that assumption. The rings of Saturn are young. While the Earth was already old, while the dinosaurs were walking the surface of our world, Saturn might have been a naked planet. The rings we see today are likely only 10 to 100 million years old. In the deep time of the cosmos, they are a temporary anomaly, a brief, spectacular flash of violence that we just happened to be alive to witness. To understand how these rings were born is to understand the Roche limit. Every massive body in the universe has an invisible boundary surrounding it. If a smaller object, like a moon or a comet, crosses this line, the gravitational influence of the planet becomes lethal. The gravity pulls on the front side of the moon significantly harder than it pulls on the back side. As the moon drifts closer, the internal strength of the rock can no longer hold it together. The planet literally reaches out and shreds the moon into trillions of pieces while it is still in the sky. Saturn's rings are the debris of such a murder. A moon, perhaps 200 miles across, wandered too close to the giant. It was caught in the gravitational shredder, torn apart molecule by molecule, and spread into a flat, wide disk of ice and rock. Every time you look at Saturn through a telescope, you are looking at the tomb of a dead world. But the horror of Saturn doesn't stop at the murder of its moons. It lies in the fact that the evidence is being systematically erased. Saturn is a planet that consumes its own history. As the pieces of the dead moon orbit Saturn, they are constantly colliding, grinding against one another, and being bombarded by solar radiation. This creates a phenomenon known as ring rain. The magnetic field of Saturn, combined with gravity, is actively pulling the ring material into the planet's upper atmosphere. Trillions of tons of water ice are falling into the clouds of Saturn every single hour. NASA estimates that at this rate, the rings will be completely gone in less than 300 million years. We live in a brief, lucky window where the tragedy is still visible. If human beings had evolved a few 100 million years earlier, or a few 100 million years later, the jewel of the solar system would be nothing more than a plain, golden ball. The solar system is a place of constant, shifting destruction. Nothing is permanent. Not even the most spectacular structures in our neighborhood can survive the hunger of the giants. But if you look past the rings, Saturn hides worlds that are even more unsettling. Because while the rings represent a world that was destroyed, the moon Titan represents a world that is fundamentally wrong. Titan is the only moon in the solar system with a thick, substantial atmosphere. It is 1.5 times as dense as the air on Earth. It is a world of orange haze and nitrogen clouds. But it is what happens on the surface of Titan that challenges our understanding of biology. Titan is the only other world in the universe where we have found standing liquid on the surface. It has vast lakes, meandering rivers, and massive seas. It has a full hydrological cycle, with clouds and rain feeding a landscape of carved canyons and rolling dunes. But it is not a cycle of water. Titan is so cold, minus 290 degrees Fahrenheit, that water has been frozen into the consistency of rock. The mountains of Titan are made of ice, but at these temperatures, methane and ethane, chemicals that exist as gas on Earth, turn into liquid. It rains liquid natural gas on Titan. The seas of Kraken Mare and Ligeia Mare are hundreds of feet deep, filled with liquid methane that is as clear as glass and as cold as death. Titan is a dark, distorted mirror of Earth. It possesses all the ingredients for a prebiotic chemistry, an environment where life could theoretically emerge, but it is a life that would be built on a foundation of liquid gas instead of water. To any human being, Titan is a toxic, freezing nightmare. To the universe, it is an experiment in how far chemistry can go without the warmth of a star. And then there is Enceladus, the small, white moon we discussed before. While Titan hides its secrets under a haze, Enceladus is actively screaming them into the void. It is a moon that is being squeezed so hard by Saturn's gravity that it is venting its internal ocean into space. But notice the connection. The geysers of Enceladus are actually replenishing one of Saturn's rings, the E-ring. The giant shreds one moon to create a ring, while another moon bleeds itself dry to maintain another. It is a cycle of geological misery that has no end. Saturn is a world of breathtaking beauty that functions as a planetary graveyard and a laboratory for alien nightmares. It is a reminder that the outer solar system operates at a scale of violence and time that makes our history look like a footnote. But as we leave the golden clouds and the disappearing rings of Saturn, we realize that we have still only seen the bright part of our system. We have been traveling through regions where the sun, though distant, is still the dominant light. To truly understand the terror of our neighborhood, we have to travel where the light begins to fail. We have to look at the giants that were struck so hard they were tipped onto their sides, and the worlds where it rains diamonds in the dark. We are about to enter the domain of the ice giants, worlds of supersonic winds and absolute isolation, sitting on the threshold of the final abyss. It is time to meet Uranus and Neptune, and to realize that the further you go, the more the solar system stops looking like a neighborhood and begins to look like a void that simply doesn't want you there. We are moving into the deep freeze, and as we will find, some things are better left undisturbed in the dark. As we leave the golden rings of Saturn behind, we pass a threshold of no return. We are entering the deep freeze. In this region of our neighborhood, the sun, the nuclear tyrant that ruled the inner worlds, is reduced to a distant, cold point of light. It is no longer a source of warmth. It is merely a bright star in a lightless sea. We are entering the domain of the ice giants, Uranus and Neptune. For much of our history, these worlds were nothing more than faint, blue specks in our telescopes. Even today, they remain the least visited and most mysterious major planets in our system. But the few glimpses we have caught, specifically through the eyes of the Voyager 2 spacecraft, reveal worlds that are fundamentally broken. These are not just planets. They are the survivors of ancient cosmic traumas that defy human imagination. Let's look at Uranus. Through a telescope, it appears as a featureless, pale blue marble, smooth, quiet, and seemingly peaceful. But this peace is the silence of a victim. Uranus is the only planet in the solar system that orbits entirely on its side. While the Earth spins like a top, and Jupiter spins like a massive wheel, Uranus rolls through the dark like a ball. Its north and south poles face the sun directly, one after the other, in a cycle that lasts 84 years. This is not a natural configuration. The laws of physics do not produce sideways planets. Every model of the early solar system suggests that Uranus was born upright, like its siblings. To reach its current state, something catastrophic had to happen. Astronomers believe that billions of years ago, when the solar system was still a chaotic furnace of proto-worlds, Uranus was struck by an object at least twice the mass of the Earth. This was not a glancing blow. It was a planetary assassination. The impact was so violent it didn't just gouge a crater. It physically knocked the entire planet over, permanently tilting its axis and trapping it in a sideways orbit forever. The consequences of this ancient murder are felt today in the most extreme seasons in the known universe. Because of its tilt, each pole of Uranus spends 21 consecutive years in total, lightless winter, followed by 21 years of relentless, unblinking summer. It is a world of temporal extremity, where the very concepts of day and night are stretched across decades. And Uranus is a world that has gone cold. Unlike the other gas giants, which still radiate heat left over from their formation, Uranus is a thermal anomaly. It is the coldest planet in the solar system, with atmospheric temperatures dropping to -370 degrees Fahrenheit. It is as if the ancient impact didn't just knock the planet over, it extinguished its internal fire. Uranus is a hollowed-out giant, a sideways grave drifting through the deep freeze. But the moons of Uranus tell an even darker story. They are named not after gods or titans, but after characters from the tragedies of Shakespeare. And one of them, Miranda, is the most geologically haunted object in our system. Miranda looks like a world that was shattered and then glued back together by someone who didn't know how the pieces fit. Its surface is a chaotic jumble of towering cliffs, deep canyons, and bizarre, chevron-shaped grooves. The highest cliff in the solar system, Verona Rupes, stands on Miranda, plunging 12 miles into the abyss. If you were to jump from the top, the gravity is so low it would take you 10 minutes to hit the bottom. Miranda is a vision of a Frankenstein moon. Scientists suspect it may have been blown apart by a massive impact as many as 5 times in its history, only to have the pieces gravitationally reassemble each time into a more distorted, mangled version of its former self. It is a moon that refuses to stay dead. But as we leave the sideways wreck of Uranus and travel even further into the abyss, we find ourselves approaching the final monster of the major planets. Neptune is a world of absolute, supersonic fury. It is the most distant major planet, nearly 3 billion miles from the Sun. It is so far away that it has only completed one single orbit since it was first discovered in 1846. At this distance, Neptune receives almost no energy from the Sun. It should be a frozen, stagnant ball of ice. Instead, it is a world of the most violent weather in the solar system. The winds on Neptune scream through the atmosphere at 1,200 miles per hour, faster than the speed of sound on Earth. To stand in a Martian windstorm is to feel a gentle breeze. To stand in a Neptunian storm is to be hit by a physical wall of pressure that would strip the skin from your bones in a heartbeat. We do not fully understand where this energy comes from. Unlike Uranus, Neptune has a mysterious internal heat source. It radiates 2.5 times as much energy as it receives from the distant Sun. Deep within its interior, the pressure is so immense that the laws of chemistry begin to warp. Planetary scientists believe that the extreme pressure deep inside Neptune and Uranus is enough to crush carbon atoms into solid diamonds. It is theorized that thousands of miles beneath the blue clouds, there is a literal rain of diamonds falling through the interior toward the core. In the most extreme models, there may even be liquid oceans of diamond, with diamond bergs of solid carbon floating in a pressurized, crystalline sea. It is a vision of wealth on a scale that mocks human greed, trapped in a high-pressure hell that no human being will ever see. But the true tragedy of Neptune lies with its largest moon, Triton. Triton is a world that doesn't belong. It is the only large moon in the solar system that orbits in the opposite direction of its planet's rotation, a retrograde orbit. This is a scientific smoking gun. It proves that Triton was not born orbiting Neptune. It was an interloper, a rogue world from the Kuiper belt that wandered too close to the giant and was gravitationally snagged. Triton was a traveler that became a prisoner. But Neptune is a cruel jailer. Because Triton orbits in the opposite direction, tidal forces are slowly, relentlessly robbing the moon of its orbital energy. Triton is spiraling inward. The solar system is preparing for another murder. In a few 100 million years, Triton will cross the Roche limit. Just like the moon that formed Saturn's rings, Triton will be shredded by Neptune's gravity. The final planet will eventually possess a ring system that will put Saturn's to shame, the pulverized remains of its last great guest. The ice giants represent the absolute limit of our planetary knowledge. They are worlds of ancient collisions, diamond rain, and supersonic storms, sitting on the threshold of the final, lightless void. But as we look past the blue clouds of Neptune, we realize that the solar system has still not finished with us, because the final planet is not the end of our neighborhood, it is merely the gate. Beyond Neptune lies the outer graveyard, a region of space where the debris of the solar system's formation has been gathered into a dark, frozen cage, a place where the sun is just a star, and where trillions of icy objects wait in the silence of absolute zero. We are about to enter the Kuiper belt and the Oort Cloud, and as we will find, the most terrifying thing about our home isn't the planets we can see. It is the invisible monsters that are looking back at us from the dark. We are leaving the light, and we are entering the territory of the shadows. Beyond the supersonic winds of Neptune, the solar system undergoes a profound and unsettling transformation. We are leaving the era of the giants. We are crossing the threshold into the outer graveyard, a vast, lightless region where the debris of our system's violent birth has been swept into a dark, frozen exile. For most of human history, we believed that Neptune was the absolute edge. We thought that beyond the final blue planet, there was only the infinite, empty dark of interstellar space. But in 1992, the discovery of the first Kuiper Belt object shattered that illusion. We realized that our solar system doesn't just end, it dissolves into a chaotic, icy cage that surrounds us in every direction. The Kuiper Belt is the first ring of this graveyard. It is a massive disk of frozen fragments stretching from the orbit of Neptune out to roughly 4.6 billion miles from the Sun. It contains hundreds of thousands of objects larger than 60 miles across, and millions of smaller ones. These are the trans-Neptunians, the failed embryos of planets that never had the chance to grow. To understand the terror of the Kuiper Belt, you have to look at the demoted king of this region, Pluto. We grew up thinking of Pluto as the ninth planet, a small, icy world at the edge of the family. But in 2005, the discovery of Eris, a world slightly smaller than Pluto but significantly more massive, forced us to confront a terrifying reality. Pluto wasn't a lonely planet, it was merely the most visible member of a swarm. Eris was named after the Greek goddess of discord and strife, and she earned her name. Her discovery threw the scientific community into a civil war that ultimately resulted in the death of Pluto's planetary status. But the classification is irrelevant to the terror of these worlds. If you were to stand on the surface of Pluto or Eris, the Sun would be nothing more than a particularly brilliant star. It provides no warmth. The atmosphere of Pluto is a thin nitrogen veil that freezes and falls to the ground as snow when the planet moves further away from the Sun in its eccentric orbit. It is a world that literally breathes in and out over the course of centuries. But as we look deeper into the Kuiper Belt, we find objects that are even more geometrically wrong. There is Haumea, an icy world that is not a sphere, but a rapidly spinning egg. Haumea rotates so fast, once every 4 hours, that centrifugal force has stretched its frozen body into an elongated ellipsoid. It possesses its own rings and its own moons, a distorted, tumbling wreck of a world that defies every intuitive image of a celestial body. And then there are the centaurs. Most people have never heard of this population of objects, but they represent the most immediate threat from the outer graveyard. Centaurs are icy bodies that orbit in a state of gravitational limbo between Jupiter and Neptune. Their orbits are fundamentally unstable. They are transitional objects caught in a cosmic sorting machine. Many centaurs began their lives in the Kuiper Belt, only to be nudged inward by Neptune's gravity. They now exist in a chaotic dance, their trajectories being tugged and pulled by the gravity of the four gas giants. They are shipwrecks drifting in the currents of our neighborhood. Some will eventually be ejected from the solar system entirely, lost to the interstellar void. Others will fall into the Sun. But a terrifying fraction will be deflected inward, into our neighborhood. When a centaur is pushed into the inner solar system, the Sun's warmth begins to evaporate its icy shell. It grows a tail. It becomes a short-period comet. The outer graveyard is not a static warehouse of ice. It is a reservoir that is continuously shedding its material inward toward us. The comets we see in our night sky are the ghosts of the Kuiper Belt, redirected toward the fire. But the Kuiper Belt is merely the inner suburbs. To find the true edge of our home, we have to look past the disk and into the sphere. We have to face the Oort Cloud. If the solar system were a house, the Oort Cloud would be the dark, lightless wilderness that begins miles beyond the back fence. It is a colossal, spherical shell of icy debris that completely encompasses the entire solar system. It begins at roughly 186 billion miles from the Sun and extends out to nearly 10 trillion miles, halfway to the nearest neighboring star. The Oort Cloud is believed to contain over 2 trillion frozen comets. In this region, the Sun is just another light in the sky. The temperature is absolute zero. The objects here orbit so slowly that a single trip around the Sun can take several million years. This is the ultimate graveyard, where the oldest, most primitive material of the solar system sits in a state of permanent, lightless stasis. But this graveyard is not secure. We like to think of our solar system as an isolated island, but we are not alone in the galaxy. Every few tens of millions of years, the Sun's orbit around the center of the Milky Way brings us close to another star. These close stellar encounters are the equivalent of a gravitational earthquake. When another star passes within a few light years of us, its gravity reaches into the Oort Cloud. It stirs the graveyard. It nudges thousands, perhaps millions, of frozen comets out of their slow, stable orbits and sends them falling toward the inner solar system. It takes 1 million years for these nudged objects to reach us, but when they arrive as long-period comets, colossal masses of ice and rock that enter our neighborhood with almost no warning. Unlike the asteroids we can track for decades, an Oort Cloud comet can appear out of the darkness and reach the Earth in a matter of months. We are living inside a cage made of 2 trillion potential impactors, and the galaxy is constantly rattling the bars. But as we peer into this outer darkness, we realize there is something even more unsettling than the ice. There is a ghost in the graveyard. For decades, astronomers have noticed a strange mathematical anomaly in the Kuiper belt. A handful of the most distant, most extreme objects are not orbiting randomly. Their orbits are clustered together, tilted at the same angle, as if they are being shepherded by an invisible hand. The statistical probability of this clustering happening by chance is less than 0.007%. The evidence points to a single, terrifying conclusion. There is something massive lurking in the outer dark that we have never seen. A world 5 to 10 times the mass of the Earth, orbiting in the lightless void hundreds of times further out than Neptune. We call it Planet 9. If it exists, Planet 9 is a monster of gravity. It would be a super-Earth or a mini-Neptune, a world that was likely kicked out of the inner solar system during the chaotic wars of our system's infancy. It is an exile, lurking in the shadows, its existence known only by the way it manipulates the debris around it. We have scanned the skies with our best telescopes, but at that distance, a planet reflects almost no light. It is essentially invisible. We are living in a neighborhood where a world larger than our own might be hiding right under our noses, and we are functionally blind to it. But the solar system is not just hiding its own secrets, it is a porous environment. In 2017, we detected an object named Oumuamua. It was the first interstellar visitor ever recorded, a dark, cigar-shaped shard of rock that had come from another star system entirely. It didn't orbit the Sun. It screamed through our neighborhood at 196,000 miles per hour and disappeared back into the void. 2 years later, we saw Borisov, an interstellar comet. These visitors prove that the space between the stars is not empty. It is filled with the debris of other planetary murders, other solar system wars, drifting through the dark until they are gravitationally snagged by our star. Our neighborhood is constantly being infiltrated by pieces of other worlds. When you look at the full scale of the outer graveyard, the schoolroom diagram finally and completely collapses. What replaces it is a vision of a microscopic bubble of light and warmth, surrounded by trillions of miles of freezing, lightless vacuum, guarded by 2 trillion frozen killers and an invisible ghost planet. This is the true architecture of our home. We are drifting in a sea of shadows, shielded by a sun that is slowly running out of time. Because as we look at the vast expanse of the graveyard, we have to acknowledge the final, most terrifying truth of all. The graveyard isn't just for the debris, it is being prepared for us. To understand the end of the story, we have to look back at the Tyrant in the center. We have to look at the sun, because as it ages, it is preparing for its final, violent expiration. And when that happens, the entire cozy neighborhood will be erased in a single, sustained act of solar fury. It is time to talk about the end of the world. It is time for the final expiration. We have spent these hours dismantling the most persistent comfort of the human experience. We have taken the colorful, orderly diagram of your childhood and revealed it to be a blueprint of a cemetery. We have looked at the nuclear furnace of our star, the crushing pressures of the gas giants, the radioactive tombs of the moons, and the 2 trillion frozen impactors waiting in the dark. But as we stand here, protected by our fragile magnetic cage and our thin ocean of air, we have to acknowledge the final, most terrifying truth of our neighborhood. The solar system is not just physically extreme, it is temporally finite. Everything we have discussed, every orbit, every mountain, every ocean, and every breath is part of a story that has a definite, unyielding ending. We are living through the middle of the book, and the final chapter has already been written by the laws of thermodynamics. To understand the end of our world, we have to look back at the Tyrant in the center. The sun is a main sequence star, a self-balancing act between the outward pressure of nuclear fusion and the inward crush of gravity. It has maintained this balance for 4.6 billion years, but this balance is not a steady state, it is a slow-motion consumption. The sun is a middle-aged god, and as it consumes its hydrogen fuel, it is undergoing a subtle, terrifying transformation that is happening right now, even as you watch this. As the hydrogen in the solar core is fused into helium, the core becomes denser. To maintain its balance against gravity, the core must burn hotter. This means that every 100 million years, the sun increases its luminosity by roughly 1%. To a human lifespan, this change is invisible, but to a planet, it is a death sentence. In roughly 1 billion years, long before the sun ever runs out of fuel, the rent on Earth will become too high. The sun will be 10% brighter than it is today. This extra energy will overwhelm the Earth's carbon cycle, the negative feedback loop of plate tectonics and chemical weathering that has kept our climate stable for eons. The oceans will begin to warm. As they warm, they will evaporate more rapidly. Water vapor, one of the most potent greenhouse gases in existence, will flood the atmosphere, trapping even more heat in a lethal, runaway spiral. The Earth will undergo the Venusian transition. The oceans will boil. The water vapor will rise into the high stratosphere, where the sun's ultraviolet radiation will systematically dismantle the molecules, allowing the hydrogen to bleed away into the vacuum of space. The oxygen will remain behind, reacting with the surface rocks to create a landscape of oxidized, red ruin. Earth will not be destroyed by a sudden explosion. It will be slowly, quietly bled of its lifeblood until it is nothing more than a scorched, sterile husk orbiting a brightening master. But this is merely the prologue to the final expiration. Roughly 5 billion years from now, the sun will exhaust the hydrogen in its core. The internal engine that has powered our neighborhood for 10 billion years will finally fail. Without the outward pressure of fusion, gravity will momentarily win, crushing the core until it becomes dense and hot enough to begin fusing helium. This change in fuel will trigger a catastrophic expansion. The sun will leave the main sequence and enter its red giant phase. Our star will swell to 100, perhaps 200 times its current size. It will become a bloated crimson monster that dominates the sky of every world in the system. Mercury, the baked rock that has endured the sun's fury for billions of years, will finally be engulfed, its matter vaporized and incorporated into the sun's outer layers. Venus, the beautiful inferno, will follow shortly after. What happens to the Earth is a subject of intense scientific debate. As the sun expands, it will also lose mass, blowing its outer layers into space as a powerful stellar wind. This loss of mass will weaken the sun's gravitational grip, allowing the orbits of the remaining planets to drift outward. Some models suggest that the Earth might drift far enough away to escape being swallowed. We would remain a scorched, airless cinder, orbiting just outside the sun's fiery atmosphere. Other models suggest that the drag of the solar atmosphere will be too much, and the Earth will spiral inward, meeting the same fiery end as our neighbors. Either way, the result is the same. The sanctuary is gone, the cradle is burned. But even as the inner planets are being consumed, the outer solar system will experience a brief, mocking summer. As the sun expands and brightens, the habitable zone, that narrow band of space where liquid water can exist, will shift outward. The frozen moons of Jupiter and Saturn, like Europa and Enceladus, will see their ice shells melt. For a few million years, they may become ocean worlds, basking in the glow of a dying red sun. It will be a transient, beautiful moment in a graveyard, because a red giant star is an unstable star. Eventually, the sun will run out of helium. It will undergo a series of violent thermal pulses, coughing its outer layers into the void like a dying man gasping for air. These layers will expand outward, creating a glowing, colorful shell of gas known as a planetary nebula. From a distant star system, our home will look like a beautiful, glowing jewel in the dark, a ghost of a solar system. And then the light will go out. What remains of the sun will be its core, a white dwarf. This is an object roughly the size of the Earth but containing half the mass of the sun. It will be so dense that a teaspoon of its material would weigh 5 tons. It will possess no nuclear fire. It will simply be a glowing ember, radiating the leftover heat of its former life. The sun will spend the next trillion years slowly cooling, fading from white to yellow to a dull red, and finally to a black dwarf, a cold, dark lump of carbon and oxygen drifting in the permanent night. The solar system will not end with a bang, but with a long, slow fade into the shadows. The remaining planets, the gas giants, the frozen wrecks of the inner worlds, and the trillions of comets in the Oort Cloud will continue to orbit this cold corpse for longer than the current age of the universe. We will become a neighborhood of ghosts. But as we look at this certain future, and as we look back at the violent, terrifying history of our neighborhood, we arrive at a realization that is both heavy and strangely liberating. The solar system was not built for us. It is not a sanctuary designed to keep us safe. It is a dynamic, indifferent, and extreme machine that operates on scales of time and power that make human history look like a microscopic flicker. We are a brief spark of consciousness in a very dark and very violent room. We have spent our time mapping the asteroids, measuring the solar wind, and peering into the abyssal oceans of distant moons. We have learned to see past the schoolroom diagrams and face the reality of the shooting gallery. And in doing so, we have found that the very things that make the solar system terrifying are the same things that make our existence miraculous. We are alive because a planetary collision gave us a moon and a heavy core. We are alive because a gas giant acts as a partial shield. We are alive because we happen to exist in the brief, 4 billion year window between the chaos of birth and the furnace of death. The order we see is a temporary gift. The peace we feel is a fragile ceasefire. So what do we do with this knowledge? We do what our species has always done when faced with the dark. We look closer. We build better telescopes. We send bolder probes. We cherish the local time we have on this small blue planet. knowing that we are surrounded by a graveyard of failed worlds and a future of inevitable fire. We realize that the safe diagrams were never a map of our home. They were a challenge, an invitation to understand the true nature of the place we call reality. Tonight, you have looked into the heart of the nuclear tyrant. You have felt the crushing weight of the giants and the silence of the outer graveyard. You have seen the scars on our moon and the rust on our neighbor. The neighborhood is far more terrifying than you think, but it is also far more extraordinary. We are drifting through a cathedral of void, riding a rock with a stolen heart, orbiting a star that is preparing to consume us. And yet, for this brief flickering moment, we can look out at the dark, understand the trap, and feel absolutely, perfectly at home. Look up tonight, the ceasefire is still holding. The sun is still middle-aged. The asteroids are, for now, missing their mark. Cherish the view, because in this solar system, nothing lasts forever. And once the light goes out, even the stars won't remember we were here. If you have stayed with us until the end of this long journey through the dark, consider taking one final action in our brief window of time. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what part of our neighborhood haunts you the most. It is the only way we can stay connected before the future arrives. Good night and sleep well. The shield is still holding, for now.